Hi guys, before I get into the restoration, I would just like to mention that I am not a professional. Everything I do is my own DIY experience. This video is to show you how I go about solving the issues that I find, which may or may not be fit for you. Before doing any project for yourself, you should always do your own research and understand the risks you may be taking. So with that said, let's get right into the actual issues at hand. I have this pretty old and dilapidated back room. It's seen its better days. The room is roughly 3 by 3 meters. One of the walls had a fitted wardrobe, which I removed. The wood was pretty badly damaged because of the condensation. There was no ventilation in the wardrobe, so that all had to go. There was minor damage to the wallpaper, but nothing to the masonry, which is really lucky for me. The other thing was this big air brick hole. I can only imagine it's because of some water ingress from the other side, which was patched up. But that's another issue for another day. Today, my goal is to fix this cracking ceiling. You can see that there's large cracks going across the whole room. When I apply a bit of pressure, I can feel the ceiling move and make noise. That's not a good sign. I have a good idea what the issue is, but I need to make sure by going up into the loft and investigating what's on the other side. The ceiling is most definitely all lath and plaster. It's an old method of using small cuts of timber with gaps, which is then plastered over to make a key on one side and a flat surface on the other. The reason the ceiling is falling apart is all the keys are very fragile and breaking away. If you do have a ceiling like this, you need to be really careful, otherwise it could just start all coming down, especially if you start cutting away those timbers or messing around with the keys too much. It could just literally all fall as one big slate. To solve this, I do have a couple options. The first one would be to remove all the lath and plaster and have a fresh start, so just basically bare joists. This would give me a clean look and remove any possibility of the ceiling falling. Though the biggest downside of this is that I would need to remove and then bag it all up. So this will create a lot of rubble. It could also have some potential hazardous materials like asbestos in it. I don't want to be having that spread around the house. Anything like that would obviously cost a lot more to remove because then it needs professional attention. Drilling small holes, I think is fine. But anything more than that would basically contaminate the whole building. The best option for me is to just overboard the whole ceiling. From what I can see, the joists are in good condition. That means that the overboarding should be pretty easy to do if I make sure that I am hitting the joists and not the plaster or the lath. To map out all the joists, I went up to the loft and used a screwdriver to create little guide holes next to each joist. So basically 2 holes per joist, so that I can create visible lines and spacing from underneath. I should have used a chalk line here, but I couldn't find mine, so I'm just using a pencil and a laser level. I drew out each joist, so I roughly know where each one is. And then I sort of started thinking about what to do with the slanted ceiling. If you have a straight ceiling, then you don't have to worry about this. But for me, I have this section here, which is bit of an unknown. I could have just done the same exact thing where I could go into the loft and map out the ceiling from the other side, but it's actually quite hard for me to get to. It's been foamed over from one side, so I will need to remove the foam to get to it, or I would need to start removing the ceiling lath and obviously plaster. So that would be a no-go, as I don't want to be touching that too much. So instead, what I'm just going to do is create a frame which will hold the plaster. In my case, it will be insulated plaster, so it actually gives me a little bit of comfort that I can create a sturdy frame attached to masonry and the upper joist. To make the frame, I got the cheapest joists I could find. These were the ones shown on the screen. The next thing I needed to do is attach them to the masonry. I actually found out that there's a portion of the wall, about 20 centimeters worth of galvanized plaster mesh, not brick. So I actually had to go down further than I expected to attach the joists. The reason why you can't attach the joist there is because the plaster is not strong enough. especially for the heavy weight that I'm going to be putting on them with the insulated plasterboard. I could also already see that a portion of the wall was cracking where the galvanized plaster started. So I just wanted to make sure I have a clean start by going far enough to reach just basic brick. The screws that I used to attach the joist to the brick was these concrete easy drive screws. They don't require any raw plugs. You just go straight into the brick. They are very strong from what I've used them on, and they haven't failed me yet. If you do use these screws, you need to be sure to install them correctly. So in the image, you can see that there is a pilot hole that is the same diameter as the unthreaded part of the screw. This ensures that the threads bite into the masonry when you do drill it in. And for the timber, that the pilot hole is larger than the threaded portion, so that you actually fasten the timber to the wall. Once the wall joist was in place, I started to think about where I wanted the ceiling joist. I had to make sure I gave it enough clearance so that the slatted portion of the ceiling doesn't interfere. For this, I just took out the laser level and marked out the sort of spacing for the timber that I wanted. The screws that I used for the timber had to be long enough to go through the whole ceiling plaster to reach the joists on the upper side. So for this, I used these longer screws and did the same for each joist so that it's all good and secure. Then in between, I spaced out the smaller parts to basically give it the same slant as before. I did use a slightly larger angle this time, just because of the length, the extra length that we added. And after that, it seemed pretty sturdy. I couldn't get it to budge, and it could take my weight very easily. So I think a bit of insulated plasterboard should do just fine. Now that we have a solid base for our plasterboard to go on, we can start cutting the plaster to shape. What I did here is I scored one side of the paper and then cracked the chalk inside. This then allows me to see a nice line on the other side and then just cut the rest off. For the section that had the insulated plasterboard, I used a saw to cut it down. It's not as easy because of the PIR backing, and that's just a bit thick. If you have polystyrene, it could possibly be a bit easier just by scoring it and then cutting with a razor from the back. But I just found that it's easiest to saw it through and then just be careful with the dust. To get the plasterboard on the ceiling, I use an extending arm. I couldn't find an extra pair of hands to help me out, so I cut down the plasterboard to manageable sizes just so I could lift it on my own. They weigh like 25 kg a board, so definitely not great to be holding above your head for an extended period of time. For the insulated plasterboard, I did this same thing. I got it to an angle and then used the extending arm to sort of push it up against the corner. That way I could screw it in. For the screws, I used the shorter ones on the ceiling, and then for the slanted ceiling, I used the much wider and also longer screws, just so it reaches through the insulation into the joist and is all nice and secure. I also use these washers that are for plasterboard. I was a bit unsure that the screws on its own could hold the weight of the insulation board, so they just gives me that extra security that it's going to stay in place for as long as it can. When measuring out the plasterboard, I made sure to have it match up against the joists so that every corner can be screwed in. This will ensure that the plasterboard is fully supported. I placed the screw roughly every 10 to 15 centimeters and then left a clearance of 1 centimeter around the border of the wall in case of any expansion. Once it was all done, this is how it looked. And to finish off the ceiling, I am going to plaster it, but I think that's for another video. It is quite a lengthy process. If you would like to join me for that, please watch part 3, which is the plastering. For part 2, it will be me doing the insulation board for the walls. If you did enjoy the video, please give a like and a comment, and if you have any ideas or improvements that I could be working on, please let me know that. That gives me good feedback to then improve that and add that to my future videos.